I don't know any jokes. A guy came in to interview for a job at LucasArts when I worked there, and he didn't really go very well at all. And then he left, and we were at Skywalker Ranch, and we went to lunch, and we found him wandering around the main house. Like, he just wanted to explore the ranch after, which is really against the rules. And then we're like, we should call the cops on this guy. This guy's really scary. And then we saw him again at GDC, and he's like, hey, have you thought about whether I got a job or not? I'm like, no. And he goes, I have a joke. These two flies are sitting on a lump of shit. I was like, oh, this is the worst interview ever. Sorry about the language, but that's how shocking it was. I was like, oh, God. And he goes, and then one of the flies farts. And the other fly says, do you mind? I'm eating. And we hired him. His name is Dave Grossman.
Oh, man.
Sorry again for the language. Just wanted to get all the kids out of the room.
So thanks again so much for coming out here, and so excited about the fact that Grim Fandango, which I consider to be the best adventure game ever made, is going to get a second life in a remastered version. And I figured I'd ask the sort of start at the start question is, where did Grim come from? And did you always know you wanted a noir thing in the Land of the Dead, or how did you end up there?
Yeah, how did that come about? I'm just happy that we get to talk about an old game. Well, it's kind of new, also. Everything here is all about new stuff. But
well, Grim's kind of forever young. It's sort of timeless.
You can't see the characters aging because there's no skin on them.
It's true.
The earliest, back in college, I took this class called The Forms of Folklore, which was the best. Like I always say, the classes that helped me, people ask me what should I study if I want to get into games and stuff. And all the things that helped me the most were the classes that were not in my CS major. They were like my anthro classes or my English classes and all the just crazy things there are to learn in the world, or what help you when you're coming up with ideas for a game. And this anthro class was all about folklore, which was everything from ancient legends, myths, to like jump rope rhymes and riddles and card games and things you could play. And the teacher would just like ask somebody like, what kind of game did you play in the car when you saw a car with one headlight? This is off topic. Anyway, and someone would say like, oh, it was punch bug, and you could punch the other person, and then you could tell them what state they were from, and all these amazing things that you just tell from what version of the story you told. So anyway, we had one section on the Day of the Dead, and we studied how the Day of the Dead holiday had kind of evolved in Mexico. And it was so fascinating to me because there's this very serious religious holiday in the Catholic Church, Todos Santos, which is like, it was about remembering your dead relatives, and it's very reverent and quiet. And then at a certain point, the Mexican Board of Tourism was like, we should kind of amp this up a little bit. It's like some of the towns are doing it right, and they have the sugar skulls out, and they have the festivals and the parades and stuff. And like we should. So I just love that angle where it was like a serious religious holiday, but also kind of like a little commercial angle. Like let's amp this up and really get into this. And then I saw the little, sometimes they call calaveras or calacas, the little paper mache skeletons, and the little dioramas of them. Someone gave me a skeleton woman on an operating table giving birth to a skeleton baby, skeleton doctors, and I was like, God, this looks like a game to me. This looks amazing. And exactly. And you'd see that I had a book where the backgrounds were all black, and it was like these day glow colors on these little dioramas of skeleton dentists and skeleton street sweepers, and it just looked like a little world that you could jump into and run around with. And so I was like, I want to make a game about that. And as we were working on it, we're also really just happened to be in this phase where I was reading a lot of Raymond Chandler and watching a lot of Humphrey Bogart movies, and I was like, I want to have this angle of corruption in it. You know, just the way that serious religious holiday had been kind of corrupted by tourism, but was still good for a lot of people. I wanted to have that corruption angle be in there, and taking things from like the movie Chinatown about these plots of an evil land scheme going on. Just it all seemed to fit together.
Yeah, totally. Let's move to the noir stuff. I think it's really interesting that you were reading that stuff while you were thinking about the Day of the Dead stuff, because you found a way to meld them that seemed to build a cohesive world. And I think that's really interesting. And before we talk about sort of the design of the world, can we talk about noir stuff? Do you have a favorite? Noir.
Let's talk about noir.
Okay.
I like saying noir.
Me too. I think I say it wrong and too slowly.
I never say noir. It's kind of like anime.
Mm-hmm.
Ever since someone tells you, no, it's not called anime, it's called anime, and then I still say it wrong because I don't want to sound like, well, noir. Let's say noir. Noir.
Fair.
Noir. Keep going.
So, do you have a favorite noir film? Like, there's a lot of Hollywood noir and Grimm's.
I mean, I think my favorite film of all time was Casablanca.
Me too.
Yeah. It's like party.
It's so good.
And it seemed, I always felt that answer was always obvious because it was on TV a lot when I was a kid, and I always thought, well, everyone's seen it. But a lot of people have not seen Casablanca, but it's an amazing movie. I just think it should be what, like, film school should just be watching that movie over and over and over again. It's just really great. And it's got, Rick is just such an awesome character. Him in his white tuxedo, and he's just sitting there drinking and smoking and bummed out. He's just amazing, just heavy. Everything weighs so heavily upon him.
And Manny becomes that in the second year.
Yeah, that's why Manny has a white tuxedo for sure.
Yeah. But then he kind of becomes Humphrey Bogart from Key Largo later on with the sort of captain's cap and the boat. Humphrey Bogart ended up in a lot of small,
he looked good in the sailor suit.
He did.
Even in the cane mutiny, he looked really good in that hat. He was meant to be in that. It was perfect for him. And costume changes. There's not enough costume changes in games. It really shows. People don't wear the same clothes all the time. Except for, well,
Ernest. That's all. I'm sorry. But there were a lot of other Casablanca characters that sort of made their way in there.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sidney Greenstreet, that Hector Lamont was basically based on Sidney Greenstreet, who owned the
chuckle.
Yeah, and he owned the Blue Parrot, which kind of became the Blue Casket in Grimm. And there's all these things that we just totally stole from. Well, it's a reference to show how smart we were.
For sure. Well, this is one of the things that's really interesting. That's really humble of you to say, but it's really easy to be derivative.
Extremely humble.
It's really easy to be derivative and when you're pulling from stuff like that. But there's nothing about Grimm that's derivative. It's so vital, and any one of its characters pretty much seems like they could be the subject of their own game.
But if you steal from enough sources, it's really not stealing at all. Just take a lot of them. No one can really pin it on one. Yeah, just get from a bunch. If you watch everything, well, just a lot of stuff in Grimm it's very inspired by. Just loved movies and books that were that just all showed up in that game.
So what was finding Grimm's visual aesthetic sort of guidelines? What did that look like? Finding that world?
Well, our lead artist was Pete Seiko, and Peter Chan did all the concept art, and it was one of those weird. I don't want to make it sound like it was easy because I didn't do any of it, so it was really easy for me. But once we started combining, let's do Mexican folklore mixed with noir, which started to become more like Mayan and Aztec mixed with Art Deco, which is everything all of a sudden looked awesome. As soon as you put Mayan and Aztec stuff in an Art Deco setting, it really looks cool. And just all these things happen. Peter Chan would send us a package of fresh art every week, and he would have a drawing of a ziggurat, on a cruise liner. And I was like, I've not seen that before. So that looks awesome. There's one theater called the Aztec. There's certain Art Deco movie theaters, and I think that's in Colorado or something. There's just a few. There's a building in San Francisco that has an Aztec and Art Deco lobby. That's where my dentist is. That's why I go there.
One of the things I was sort of thinking about when I was rewatching a bunch of Grimm stuff over the past couple weeks was that there's this constant theme of movement and transit that runs throughout that I suppose mirrors all souls are supposed to be on their 4-year journey through the afterlife, and the worst thing that you can do to someone is plant them or root them in one spot so they can never sort of.
Oh, I like that thing with the root you just did. I wish I thought of that at the time.
Well,
I should have really. That's good.
That's
true. Because that came up, partially through the game. Where this, it's hard to make people in gangster movies. You're really worried about someone getting shot. You're worried about characters dying. It's how do you worry about that when everyone's dead already? So we invented that whole idea of sprouting, of kind of going back to life and turning into a bunch of flowers, and making that really horrifying to imagine. Because part of the problem was, as we were stealing stuff from a lot of different sources, Chinatown has this great plot that I'll just spoil for everyone now. No, I won't. But you uncover this land scheme Noah, Noah, what's his name?
John Huston.
John Huston's character Noah something or other. He had this great scheme, and I was like, oh, it's so great that when a villain has a really good plot, Like a really good thing. He's up to no good and has really thought it out. And your main character trips over a piece of it at a time until you realize that this is whole like, oh my god, conspiracy. And so we promise we're working on a conspiracy up here, but that's okay. So it and I'm thinking about that. So I had to, that was about land, this land scheme, and so originally it was Manny was going to be a real estate agent, because I also really liked, there's a lot of new noir that was coming out at that time, like Glengarry and Ross and The Usual Suspects, and Glengarry and Ross just had the desperation of salesmen that was just so, feel it, and it was just so painful to watch, and just, oh, I love that movie.
Jack Lemmon's super rough to watching that.
It's so good, it's so good. Every time I watch that movie, I want to stand up and cheer for every single monologue in it. But he's going to be a real estate salesman, and I was like, well, who want to buy land in the land of the dead? Like, you don't really, because the folklore that really inspired a lot of that made me realize that it could be a game was when I started reading about the 4-year journey of the soul. You die, and then your soul goes on a journey that takes 4 years, and you're trying to get to Mictlan, or this land of eternal rest. And it just sounded like this great road trip, this great like quest. It just seemed like the hero's journey, all the things. It just seemed like this is something you have to make a story about. But it was all about moving across the land of the dead and trying to get somewhere. And so a real estate agent, who'd want to buy a house there? You'd want to keep moving. So you became a travel agent for that reason.
That's super cool. That's my feedback on that.
We're sticking with it.
All the modes of transportation were really interesting too, and it seemed like Le Mans' scheme is sort of enabled by all these changes, and urbanization is an important part of a lot of noir. That seemed to be important in Grimm too, like the city's a place where a lot of stories are, and a lot of things happen, and it changes over the course of the game. It seems like, originally at some point in the game's past, everyone had to walk their 4 years, but then you started to have these other modes of transportation, and then that led to people taking advantage of each other in ways that maybe weren't possible before. So I guess my question is, did you imagine that this Grimm's running concurrently to the real world, or that it's sort of its own timeless place?
That's a good question, because I don't really think about the real world or the land of the living that much working the game. But in my head, I guess it is set in the same period of time, and all those transportation aspects are so new. Having a super fast train. The train being the big exciting thing to get you places really fast. But the excitement about cars and everything. Yeah, for sure. That stuff, and I like trains.
Cool.
And at least the corruption, which is awesome.
Yeah,
and hot rods, also love hot rods.
Oh, yeah.
Hot rods. It kind of breaks the whole noir thing, but I really love Big Daddy hot rods.
No problem with that.
Okay, cool.
All right. So, mentioning the land of the living quickly, the brief moments that it's depicted, it's a sort of an interesting photo collage. So you never show living people to compare the skeleton people with.
Because it seemed like it would be really weird. I've seen some fan art of what Manny would look like with skin. He looks creepy. You don't want to imagine that, especially with that forehead that he has. So it's like Manny with hair, once you get used to it. And so the land, having actual people, we thought. And also 3D, the whole reason we made the game 3D, because this is like 1998, we started in 96. And there was a lot of pressure to make 3D games, and I was like, I hate that. Okay, 3D looks horrible. It looks terrible. But I really liked some aspect of it. Like Alone in the Dark came out, and you could see the zombie from 2 different camera angles, and I think that's really cool. Imagine seeing one art asset from 2 different angles. It's mind-boggling. And there was a game called Bioforge, you've ever seen, the Origin game.
That was local, I think.
It was local, yeah, Texas.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think so.
Yeah, it was Origin, yeah. And, thank you. And it had pre-rendered backgrounds, and you moved a character through it, and so I still didn't like the way that 3D looked back then, because it just looked like everyone was like cardboard boxes that had been taped together, and they had like all their details were just drawn on the outside of the boxes. But then when you see the little paper mache skeletons, all their bones are drawn. They don't model the rib cage; they just make a big wad of paper mache and then paint the rib cage on it. It's like, that looks just like 3D, 1996 3D. It's great. But I didn't say 1996 because it was 1996. So like, let's make this could be the art style for the game. And so, but then to put real people in with skin and flesh is like, basically I thought it also would look horrible. And so we went for this art style that was like a photo collage, but also because this thing is optical illusion. I used to like when I was a kid, if you take a picture of someone from a magazine and you cut out their eyes, like a square around their eyes and a square around their mouth, and then you turn them upside down and put them back on, they just look like the devil.
No, I haven't heard that.
It's fun.
That sounds scary.
Yeah, try that right now.
I have a magazine.
It's really fun. So that's what happens if you scare the people in land living. They do that. They flip upside down.
So I was wondering if anything turned out way better than you expected in Grimm, and anything that you thought was gonna work really well but didn't. Looking back on it.
The game turned out better than it turned out better. When we ended up cutting a lot of stuff, which is weird because it seems so big now, but we always start really ambitious and get slightly more ambitious and less ambitious later. What didn't work? Well, the thing that I really thought would work really well, one of the things that was great about Bioforge is that you could travel through all these different camera angles, and the camera would be above you, and then to the side, and then underneath you, looking up. And the thing that made it not confusing as a player was that you could just push the forward button. Had these amazing tank controls, which were really successful. I thought, and I loved tank controls, and at the time, well, I'm talking about like I really loved. They were normal at the time. Bioforge had them, and Tomb Raider, and Resident Evil 1 and stuff. And I always say this is like when we find a picture of my mom with these striped slacks on from the 70s, and she's like, it was very popular at the time. So tank controls were really popular at the time, but I thought it helped with the camera angle problem. But it turned out to be like the number one thing people complained about in the game was driving these tank controls around. And part of it's because like it was built for this number pad on the side of your keyboard that not everybody has. They were using the other keys. I'm really good at it. So in the new game, it's still there, but it's we'll have other controls for younger kids. Don't know how to work the tank controls, so we put in helpful controls for the generation, the now generation, who wants to just push in a direction, have the character go that direction. And other radical ideas.
They're spoiled. They don't know how hard it was to run.
And the Legos are all built for you now.
So, the remaster, what's that like revisiting all that stuff? Sort of, are you changing much, or?
Yeah, we are trying, like, the way, we're doing a little documentary about it. I don't know if you've seen it, but one of the programmers on it describes it as trying to do like a Blu-ray of Casablanca, which is just because Grim Fandango is better than Casablanca. No, but like, it's, some people want us to remake it from scratch, but we were talking about, we wanted to make the fidelity of the original version it just look a lot better and sound a lot better and play a lot better. So it's the original, that was the handcrafted art I just really liked the art. We just wanted to like have, we have modern lighting techniques we can do, and we can up-res these textures and these characters, and we can do things to make it look better, and we can actually take the sound. Some of this, songs our composer, Peter McConnell, was unhappy with the electrical versions he had to use of all the symphonic parts, and so we're actually going to re-record those with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. They sound amazing. So great.
Cool.
Yep. And a lot of Melbourne fans out there. So just making it look and sound and adding, like I said, those modern controls for people to play it, I think is what would be the tack we're taking with it.
Sounds awesome.
Thanks. Thank you. It will be awesome.
Pretty cool.
It's going to be pretty cool.
I need to look in my notebook for more questions.
That's the same kind of notebook I use at work.
Really?
Yeah.
It's just stolen from you. Sorry. So, I didn't really though. It's mine. You could have did it at Walmart.
Five subject, 4 subject. Four subjects. I use 5 subject at work.
Three, Tim. It's 3.
When you're older, you can handle 5. I'm like a big believer in free writing. Have you ever tried that? Where you just
Isn't that where ghosts make you write stuff?
Is that free writing?
I thought so.
Well, I think that kind of fits because this is about. It's scary, but it's the idea that one of the intimidating things when you're writing is to get started, to just look at the blank page and be like, and then the first character said, this is horrible. So free writing is like you cannot censor yourself at all, and you just write, even if you're writing just the same word over and over again, purple, like whatever. You have to keep writing for it's 2 minutes, or sometimes do it for an hour. And once you can't stop, you stop that little sensor in your head that makes you think too much about writing, and then you just start barfing out thoughts, and then pretty soon you have some interesting thoughts you didn't realize you had. And that's why I fill up notebooks like that of all that stuff. And then people find it, they go like, you look like the killer from Seven. You know that notebook they have in Seven? The guy just filled it out with his manifesto. Like, are you the Unabomber? It's like, well, no.
So how do you go about figuring out the sort of arcs of characters and overall pacing in your games?
I mean, every game is different. And Grimm, I think I was already like, I read some really basic writing technique, and I studied creative writing in college, but then I just read the screenplay, the Sid Field book, I think it's called, which is all about the 3-act structure. The book's only this thick, so everyone should read it. It's very simple. And it just lays out how basically you set up a 3-act structure, plot point 1 and 2, and you don't have to follow that formula for sure, but it helps you think about why they work, and then you can think about how you can use these devices in your own writing. So I do think about like the first act and how that's going to turn around, and the second act, how that kind of conflict is going to escalate, and then what kicks off the third act, and all these like technical points that you think about, like the lowest point your character goes through. And some people go more for like the hero's journey type archetypes, which I think kind of get a little overstated sometimes because people treat that as like a formula you have to stick to. Like your hero has to go through this period of this, and you don't have to. It's just like, to me, just like a bag of tricks you pull from. You want him to, maybe it would be helpful to have this Prometheus character like Obi-Wan, but you don't have to have an Obi-Wan in your story. You don't have that.
I think there's an Obi-Wan in Grimm.
No, not. But maybe it's popular as Star Wars if there was one. Okay.
Well, should we ask the audience if they have questions?
I thought you meant, okay, yeah.
Yeah.
We're doing Q&A. Yeah. How are you going to pick people?
That guy has his hand out.
Civilized, very civilized. Yes, sir.
My question's about difficulty in games. There are a lot of adventure games from like the same era as Grim Fandango and before and after, where like if things are tough, it can get really frustrating. And I feel like a lot of your games toe that line really well. It's hard enough that it's interesting and you don't just walk through it, but it doesn't end up being frustrating. Do you have any commentary on like how you find that difficulty point, or like how difficult things should be to be fun?
Yeah, I mean that's something with adventure games. That's almost all you have is the difficulty of the puzzles. That moment when you see a problem till you figure out how to solve it, that's the entertainment section of your game right there. Besides exploration and all the just being in the land, and so you have to like tune that as much as possible to make that. And it's kind of thing. It's nice to hear that you like it because there's a lot of people. You can never hit it right for everybody. Like a lot of people will find it too hard, too easy, no matter what you do. And in the old days, we were really like puzzles seem really logical to you when you design them. Because it's really easy. Yeah, you take the cat and make him go through the hole with the tape on it and get the hair for the mustache. He does I'm cowardly enough to pick an example from someone else's game. But they seem to make sense when you figured out a way to solve a problem yourself. You're like, okay, everyone will figure that out. But you realize that, no, they have a bunch of things in their inventory. There's 100 objects in this area of the game. They could try everything, but I like to think about it as like that kind of when you just don't know what to do at all in a game, I think it's really not that fun. But when you know the solution is in this area, and you just haven't looked at it from the right angle yet, I think that's a really pleasant feeling. But that's kind of like, I think it's here. My brother used to come back from college with all these weird riddles that were about like, where you start with the scenario and you can only ask yes or no questions to try to figure out the story. The one most people know is like the guy. A man was laying face down in the field with a backpack on, and you're trying to figure out what happened.
Oh yeah, the parachute guy.
Well, that's a big spoiler. That's what we're going to do for the next 45 minutes to try and... So, and then the other one was like, if he had seen the sawdust, he would still be alive. That's how they start. And then you're like, was he a parachutist? You're like, no. But, and we'd sit around the dinner table, like, and asking these, and then someone at the table would get it, and he'd be like, oh, you're getting it. And then you'd be like, oh, I get it, but yeah. And then you ask a question, and he goes, and just the look on his face is like, oh, you're getting close. Was part of the, this is so exciting, I'm so close to figuring this out, I love this feeling. And it was part of him kind of like, he was kind of like my brother kind of winking at you, kind of like, you're close. If you just think about that for a little bit longer, you'll get it. And like trying to put that in the game, trying to put in that kind of like acknowledgement to the player, like, oh, you tried to use that object on there, and that would make sense if this was the reality, but this is a game, so you've got to try it again. It's just basically entertaining confusion, I think, is the most important thing when you're designing this kind of adventure game puzzles, for sure. But we've blown it many, many times, so don't take my word for it.
Shay.
I wonder if you could talk more about the part in Grim Fandango where he revisits the land of the living everyone's faces looks like they just have a smile plastered on. To you, is that the dead like being jealous of the living and their happiness and life, or is it that they're the ultimate cynics and they see the living as like faking all their happiness? Related to that, I think somebody usually said here, sprouting is terrible to them because it's like they're coming back to life. Why is that so horrible to them?
Let's see, like yes and no. For us, it was just that we try to make this world where by the time you see the land of the living, you've kind of accepted skeletons as normal people, and so they look normal to you. And trying to have fun with the fact that if you were in a world where skeletons are normal, people would look pretty weird and gross to you with this meat flaps all over their faces and their lips all they would look disgusting. So we were trying to capture that with the technology that we had at the time, which was what was the second question?
Why was sprouting
so
horrible?
Because it was just death in that land. It completely turned you from a skeleton into a pile of flowers. Which I don't know if I would want to become a pile of flowers. And for me, it was always sickening to imagine the roots digging through the bones. It was kind of like in Dune when they put the trouts on their arms and the little filaments grow through your skin, and then you pull the thing off and you're just like a big pile of jelly. Remember Dune? Thing with the sand trouts and the.
I remember that.
Sound
He turned
traps.
into a giant worm that lived 5,000 years.
Another spoiler.
Sorry.
I know they've all read it. So just that kind of all seemed gross to me. We wanted to make it so by the end of the game, not to spoil it again, but when you see like a whole field of flowers, it's like, oh my god, this is like a killing field. This is terrifying. And the flowers are also really important in the Day of the Dead celebrations. The marigolds and the smell of marigolds is a really important part of the memories of people who celebrate the Day of the Dead.
Yes.
When revisiting the game, is there any particular thing that you've always wanted to be like, oh, this is the thing that if I could do it, I would? Or is there anything from other games you might have done, or things that you kind of always felt that way?
Yeah, I mean, there were things that were in the game that were puzzles that we wanted to do and that we cut, and people ask if we want to put those back in, but every time it's horrible to cut stuff out of your game. Like, you cut, like Brutal Legend, we cut, like, in half almost. It's hard to imagine cutting or killing your darlings, they say. But once it's done and the thing's complete, you're like, oh, yeah, that's right. That's exactly what it was supposed to be. And I'm glad I cut all that stuff because that would have just made it too long or whatever. And so once it's done, it's hard to think about going back and adding those things. There's just a couple of things that, just a couple of moments that I wanted to use the 3D a little bit more, turn off the backgrounds and have the camera move and show the characters in 3D. But I don't want to say too much about it in case we do try and do it. Who knows if we'll try and do it for the remaster. Might not, maybe. No promises. You'll see when you play the remaster. No. There's like a little touches like that. Because we do a lot more with 3D now, obviously, than we did in 1998. But for the most part, we always try to work within our constraints. So I'm trying to make something that would look good, not push up against the edge of technology so hard, so that we're doing stuff that the technology is not really helping here. So we try to like hide the edges of technology by scaling back what we were trying to do, and make paper mache skeletons instead of real people, for example. Yeah. You're the decider.
You.
How do you consider doing sort of deleted scenes approach rather than trying to incorporate maybe some more concept art or something where you puzzle designs and input and having sort of a deleted scenes approach?
Thank you, Paul, for your question. That's Paul. I just met Paul earlier. Yeah, Paul.
Hi, Paul.
Yeah. I mean, we deleted scenes are we don't. It's not like we have a bunch of made parts of the game that we cut out, but we have a concept art. We have concept art, and we have old design documents where we can actually show some of the stuff that was cut out. And I hope that we're trying to take kind of a Criterion Edition idea with the release so that we can have special features, and that would definitely be a good idea. And now that I can put them up without being sued, I think it's pretty awesome to include that.
Yes.
So with a lot of point in Winter games back then, or in your case, those kind of things, there were often games with puzzles that would create no-win conditions. So like in King's Quest or Future Wars, there were ways to behave where you just had to hope that curious, are there any in Grim Fandango, and like whether it's a bug or otherwise?
No, I hope not. I mean, that would be a big bug if we did do that, because that was just, at LucasArts, we did have a philosophy about the games that would come from Ron and Noah and all the people who started the adventure games there. It's like, we don't like dying in adventure games. That was very controversial. There was like a whole GDC thing where, like, I think Ron and Roberta Williams debated death in adventure games. It was, and Ron's theory, which I agree with, is that when you kill a character and you go to a load screen, it would say, like, do you want to reload your game? Like, you've been popped out of the fantasy of the game, and it kind of breaks that. And some games do that well, and it doesn't take you out of the fantasy. Like, you're playing Limbo and you die and you get reset really fast. It probably doesn't. But back then we were like, we don't want to leave the fantasy world. It takes a little extra design. It takes a little extra design effort to make it so that you can fail without going back to a load. But if you think about it a little bit, you can like come up with ways the character can try something and fail at it and still be in the fantasy world. So that was just a big kind of like stake in the ground that we made at LucasArts. It's like, we won't do this. And you can't ever fly to a new location and then not be able to solve a puzzle because you left a pen on your desk back in New York. I hate that kind of stuff. So we don't do that. And if it ever appears in a game, that would be we consider that like an A bug and we had to fix it.
Okay.
Wait, Anna, you're saying that's not true? We have this broken age. I just added one broken age stuff.
We have time for 2 more questions. JW?
I'd love to.
He just doesn't like you, Anna. He just doesn't want you to.
Let's do Anna first. And I dropped my notebook.
No one noticed. No one noticed.
Cool.
We'll do it quick. I won't ramble. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if there are any bugs in Grim Fandango that were interesting that that you know about now and that you think
There was. I was horrified. Just last year, I found out a bug that apparently has been there since the beginning, which is if people were talking about how the plot didn't make sense. And I was like, I wrote this really big explanation where Domino tells you about the plot, about the number 9 tickets and the counterfeiting and how it all works. And people are like, I've never heard that in the game. What are you talking about? And the bug is in the code that I wrote, which checked whether you talk to Domino. If the Lua file wouldn't load twice if you'd already loaded it before, but it checked to see if this other Lua file had loaded, which was talking to Domino in year 1. So if you talk to Domino in year 1, when you go to the island in year 3, he never talks to you about all this interesting stuff. And most players talk to Domino in year 1, so they never talk to him, and they have no idea that I've tried to basically almost made the plot make sense in year 3. And I was like, oh my god, like I really like some bugs are okay, but that one I was like, oh my god, everyone thinks that plot is terrible. But I could hide behind like in film noir, like at The Big Sleep, even like when William Faulkner did the screenplay adaptation of it, and people were like. People would ask him, like, who's the killer in this? He's like, I have no idea.
Yeah, he had to call up, was it Chandler that wrote that? And he was like, I'm confused. Who did this when? And Chandler was like,
Yeah. So that's my defense. So the plot doesn't make sense because it's noir. But the people behind residualvm.org fixed the bug, and I was like, thank you, that's awesome. So, but we're going to fix it in the remaster too. So, yay for community bug fixing.
Okay, JW?
I'd love to hear a bit more about Glorious. Like, by the end of the game, it's like your best fucking friend, and all the terrible things happen to him. Like, can you tell me?
What terrible things happened to him? He's
So
like,
many things.
what's the worst thing that happened to Glass? We almost died, but
Yeah.
Glass.
I almost cried.
If you actually cried, you can say it. No, I thank you for liking Glottis. I love Glottis. Glottis is just like, it's always really helpful to have a character who's just like uncensored emotion and doesn't really worry about, you know what I mean? Like if Manny's trying to be like Rick in Casablanca, who's really emotionally like inward and doesn't talk about how he feels, and Glottis is just like literally rips his heart out in front of you. It really helps, I think, the balance with Manny, and that's only thinking about it in retrospect. I didn't really think about that at the time, but it did help. It was helpful, and I just wanted to have this character who was a demon, because I like Big Daddy hot rods and characters that are demons with tongues hanging out, you know, and bug eyes, and they drive hot rod cars. But also that he was summoned from the land of the dead himself, and it was just he only existed to drive. Like he only existed to drive really fast, and just having a character that's pure and just says what he feels and stuff like that is just really, I think that helps people really relate to him. Someone pointed out to me the other day that like I tweeted a picture of someone's Manny Calavera tattoo, and I was like, why are there no Glottis tattoos? And I Google image search, I could not find a single Glottis tattoo. So what is that about that character? He's too much ink. He's too big. Orange doesn't look good. Anyway. But anyway, so that's we didn't mean to mistreat him, but he just, since he's such a big character, he just kind of tells you what he's feeling. Maybe you're more in touch with how he's suffering, but you cure him by driving really fast, and he got to soup up everything. Once a year, he got to rebuild an engine, so I think he was happy.
Okay, well, I think, do we have time for one more? Okay, you
Does anyone have the ultimate question? There's no pressure, but it's got to be the best question of all time. Wait, why is everyone pointing over there?
Over here, so.
You got a lot of votes pointing to you, so we'll...
Did you have a hard time finding any of the original assets? Like, it was made so long ago. Do you still have those computers? Do you still have those files?
Oh God, yeah. The digital archaeology going on is really intense, and it involves like trying to find people we have to talk to in 20 years, and like, did you ever back up your computer? There's things that it's something you never think about. Like when you walk away from a game and you're done, you're like, it's so fresh. You never think about archiving it. You know, a lot of people don't. And then years later, you're like, oh man, why didn't we even... There's stuff in our own games, like Psychonauts, we talk about, like, I always wanted to give a calendar out of those little scenes of the cast in every level, and they're like, oh, we don't have those files anymore. I was like, what? You didn't? It seems so horrible when you look back on it, but at the time, everyone's like, yeah, well, it was on that guy's computer. Remember when it crashed and we threw it away? Oh, yeah. So there has been a lot of stuff, but it's part of the fun in some ways, is like getting in touch with the old team, because, you know, we bring them back. We've been getting in touch with, you know, almost everybody on the original team and talking to them about, you know, remembering their experiences. And also, do you have a hard drive? Did you ever... And it's kind of touchy because you weren't supposed to take stuff from work. It's just between you and me. Did you grab any of that stuff on the way out, like the original score? Did you... Nope, I don't have it. But here, take this. There may or may not have been some of that stuff. But we have a lot of the... We've been able... Basically because, I shouldn't say that. I can't say where we got some of the material, but it was a team effort.
They should be really sad right now. So.
And thank God for people not following the rules all the time, because it really worked out.
Okay, thank you everyone, and thank you.
Thank you for coming, thank you for waiting so long. Sorry to wait.
Everybody, a big thanks for Tim Schafer and our guest interviewer, George Rose.